My stepmom turned my dad against me until I was pushed out into the snow with nothing but 2 suitcases, a box of memories, and $847 to my name. For 12 years, they never called, never checked if I was alive. I built myself from a cheap motel room fixing broken antiques no one wanted until one day my little side hustle grew into a company worth millions. I bought a mansion on the hill with marble floors and a view that looked down on the very house that had cast me out. The next morning, they showed up at my door. My stepmom's voice cut through the foyer. "We're moving in since you have all this extra room." What I did next, no one saw coming. But before I share my story with you, I'd love to know you're here with me. Drop a simple hi in the comments or tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing how far my story can reach. Thank you. And now, let me tell you everything. Please don't forget to subscribe to this channel. It helps me keep telling these stories, and honestly, after everything I've been through, knowing you're here means more than I can say. My name is Orion Blaze, and this is what happened when the family that abandoned me tried to come back. The night my stepmom told me to get out, the first snow of the season came down sideways over Pine Hollow and stuck to the porch rails like salt, and I stood there with 2 suitcases, a damp cardboard box of my mother's photos, and her old journal, and exactly $847 crumpled in an envelope I'd kept in my sock drawer for emergencies I never imagined would look like this. Cassandra held the door with one manicured hand and shoved a black trash bag of my clothes at me with the other, her perfume sharp and floral cutting through the cold, while a playlist thumped from the warm house behind her, as if a party were in full swing to celebrate the new world without me. "The family needs order," she said, lips barely moving, eyes already scanning over my shoulder toward the hallway. Through the crack, I could see my room stripped down to bones, my pencils corralled into a plastic bin, my old laptop pushed to a corner like a scolded child, and on the desk, a glossy printout, a space plan sketch with my bed outlined in red and labeled "Remove," and in handwriting I recognized hers, "Convert to Cassandra's office." It wasn't a fight. It was a finished plan with my absence budgeted in. Victor hovered in the foyer in his cardigan, hands awkward at his sides, the way men do when they want to help and are terrified of the price. He reached for the bowl on the console and fished out the spare car key, stepped to the threshold, and then recoiled as if the brass had burned him. "Keep your strength," he said, voice so low the words almost froze before they reached me. He didn't meet my eyes. He didn't step outside. Behind the lace of the next-door window, a neighbor's curtain shifted, someone watching the clean eviction of a grown son, and shame flared hot in my chest even as the wind needled my face. I swallowed the taste of metal and lifted the trash bag over my shoulder like I was leaving a construction site at the end of a shift. I didn't plead. I didn't ask why. There's a kind of dignity you only learn when you're standing on a porch with nowhere to sleep. I dragged the suitcases down the slick walk to the driveway, set the cardboard box on the trunk of Victor's sedan, and flipped open the lid long enough to touch the journal's swollen cover, ink haloing where some page had been torn, and the wet had pulled the blue into a bruise. Whatever was missing from that journal mattered. Even the paper seemed to ache around it. I closed the box and cinched it tight with the frayed twine I'd found in the garage earlier. If I lost everything else, I wasn't losing this. I looked back once. Cassandra had already taped a sheet of paper inside my old window just above the model sailboat Mom and I had built when I was 10. Under the header room renovation schedule, the date was neat and undeniable, 10/01/2012. 2 weeks before tonight. This wasn't a blow-up. It was a blueprint. I squared my shoulders and turned toward the highway. US 40 lay a mile of dark and wet away, and beyond it the Starlight Inn with the neon star that buzzed and flickered, and always seemed one gust away from dying, which somehow made it feel honest. I told myself motel coffee could be a lifeline, and 4 walls were 4 walls. I told myself my feet would thaw. Snow caught on my lashes. The wind cut my ears to ringing. As I reached the corner and the streetlight threw my shadow long across the road, I had one ridiculous thought that kept me upright someday. I was going to stand somewhere warm and high and look down at this street and feel nothing. The thought didn't comfort me, but it gave my legs a job. I walked. And as I walked, the same question kept knocking in my skull in time with my steps. Who tore the page from my mother's journal? And what did she write there that someone couldn't risk me reading? Room 12 at the Starlight Inn smelled like old cigarette filters and lemon cleaner, and the heater banged like a stubborn drawer before coughing out air that was more tepid than warm. But the door locked, and the roof didn't leak over the bed, which made it luxury by certain measures I was just learning. Hazel, the manager, slid a second blanket across the counter when I checked in, then started leaving a styrofoam cup of coffee outside my door at 6 a.m. with a smiley face drawn in Sharpie small axe that made it harder to lie to myself about being alone. I built a schedule on motel notepaper like it was a raft. Mornings at the Willow Creek Public Library, where the Wi-Fi was steady and the radiators hissed a kind of lullaby. Afternoons at Rustic Relics, doing data entry for Amos Carver, the owner with a snow-white mustache and a suspicious affection for broken things. Evenings back in room 12 with Mom's journal open and a pen to add my own one-line goals for the next day so I'd have to look at them when the alarm went off. Code Academy lessons on arrays and loops. YouTube rabbit holes on wood finishes and clockwork basics. Craigslist searches for free needs. Repair, all punctuated by the fact of the envelope in my backpack shrinking by $39.95 a night. $847 isn't money in a motel. It's a countdown. At the library, a retired man who always sat by the window with a stack of history books nodded at me each morning with the solemnity of monks acknowledging the same vow, and I took it that way. Discipline is belief. At Rustic Relics, Amos waved me past the front counter into the back where donated lots were triaged. Make 3 lists, he said the first day. Sellable maybe and trash. Don't fall in love with the maybe pile. The back room smelled like dust and old electricity. I wore a thrifted flannel and learned to move slow to unscrew rather than pry to listen for the difference between a hinge ready to give and one ready to snap. It wasn't heroics. It was attention. I wrote down model numbers, Googled parts, sketched wiring paths on scrap paper, and felt something in my chest call it competence click into place each time an object confessed how it had been put together. On breaks, I tucked into the brew haven with my laptop and hugged the wall outlet, eavesdropping shamelessly on a carpenter explaining grain direction to a kid with a tape measure, and a welder talking about heat discoloration on steel. I wrote down vocabulary like I was stealing a new language, curf mortis shellac patina. By late November, the envelope was thin. The motel desk clock had taught me more about insomnia than timekeeping, and I'd started to hear Cassandra's voice in my head whenever I hovered over a decision, no future. That afternoon, Hazel caught me staring too long at the rain, offered me a fresh cup, and asked if I knew the old garage beside Brew Haven. Owner's a soft touch for month to month, she said. Matter of fact, as if suggesting a new cereal at the supermarket. The suggestion landed like a flare in fog. A place to work off the motel bed. A place to move the maybe pile in to prove it. I wrote the number on my hand and told myself I'd call when I could breathe. On December 5th, a Wednesday already bruised by a rejection email from a temp agency and a frozen car door that wouldn't seal, Amos asked me to clear a corner of the back room we're culling dead weight. The stack was taller than my chest, a leaning city of lamps with cracked shades, mantel clocks with missing hands, picture frames whose glass had spidered and held anyway. I pulled a cloth off a pendulum clock to get at a crate behind it, and dust lifted in a soft explosion that made me cough. The case was walnut under grime. The beveled glass crazed in the lower right, and there on the back panel when I tilted it toward the fluorescence were 3 letters and a year carved with a pocket knife, the V and E joined by a plus like a promise. V plus E, 1992. Victor and Elena, my parents. The floor didn't tilt, but it felt like it. For a second I was 12 again, standing on a chair in our old kitchen, watching Mom set that clock after the power flickered, telling me time only looks fragile. It keeps going if you wind it. I set the clock down gently, as if it were breathing. This one's trash, Amos called from the front, not unkind. Glass is busted, and the movement seized. Don't waste time. I didn't answer. My hands had already made the decision my mouth didn't trust yet. If I take responsibility for the parts and the time off the clock, I said, bringing it forward, can I keep this one after hours? Just to try. Amos studied my face, then the initials on the wood, something passing through his eyes like recognition. You break it. He said it was broken. You fix it. You learn something that sticks. He wrote no resale on a post-it and slapped it to the back like a blessing. I carried the clock to the side table and ran a fingertip over the carved year until the dust made a clean path. The grief didn't vanish. It rerouted, became current. That's the thing about anger: when you're too tired to hold it, it converts to fuel. That night back in room 12, I laid the clock on the desk and opened Mom's journal across my knees. Near the middle, the ragged edge where a page had been torn out feathered under my thumb, the ink from the surrounding lines blotted as if someone had closed the book on a tear. I could almost hear her pen scratching late at night while I was asleep in the next room. In the margin 2 pages earlier, a phrase I'd overlooked before flickered now under the lamp: final decision. The words felt like a tossed rope I hadn't noticed when I was drowning. What decision? Who tore it away? In the morning, I asked Amos if I could look at the purchase records for the last few months as part of organizing the back room. He grunted permission. The ledger was old-school ink and carbon copies scabbed into a binder that stuck a little when I opened it. Toward the back, under a date from late fall, a line item caught my eye. Odd household lot, mixed clocks, lamps, frames from a private seller whose last name meant nothing to me but whose initial did see. I felt the hair on my arms lift. It wasn't proof. It wasn't even a clue that would hold up to daylight. It was a door frame I didn't know the house had. The days shortened. The motel heater found a rhythm. I made a chart on index cards and taped it above the desk. Learn one thing, fix one thing, sell one thing, save one thing. The Brew Haven became my second office and my classroom. The library my chapel. Some nights the fear got loud enough to rattle the window, and I answered it by winding the V+E clock, even though it didn't yet tick the key turning with a muted, stubborn grace. I'd left a life where the floor plan for my erasure had been printed and signed, and I'd stumbled into a room where every broken thing I touched offered a small, measurable response. It was enough to keep me moving. It had to be. Still, as I set the clock upright and watched the pendulum hang motionless, the same question from that porch returned, sharpened now by wood and brass and initials etched 20 years earlier. Who moved my family's clock into a discard pile, and why did it have to travel through Amos's hands to find its way back to mine? January arrived with snow piled against the curb and a lease for a drafty garage behind the Brew Haven. The rent was cheap, and the landlord only asked that I keep the noise down after 10, which was easy since my tools barely qualified as loud. 2 warped tables became workbenches. I strung up a pair of fluorescent shop lights, screwed pegboard to the wall for the handful of screwdrivers and pliers I'd collected, and wrote in black marker on a piece of cardboard 5 steps: clean, repair, refinish, reassemble, record. It was less a workshop than a vow. I started with the clock carved V+E. I replaced the frozen mainspring, polished the walnut with oil and wax, and sealed the carved initials beneath a layer of sheen that hid them from casual eyes, but preserved them for mine. I would never sell that clock. It was the compass of the whole thing. For practice, I took apart lamps, trays, and bent metal frames that Amos had written off. I ordered parts online with money I didn't really have and spent nights watching tutorials on restoring veneer until the words felt like a second language. Every mistake cost me hours and sandpaper, but each misstep also taught me why professionals swore by patience more than tools. By February, I had enough pieces to try selling. I rented half a folding table at the Willow Creek flea market, laid out 2 lamps and a refinished clock, and printed little cards with the stories I'd pieced together. Oak lamp salvaged from a Denver estate, rewired by hand, and kitchen tray, 1940s aluminum, polished and resealed. People lingered more on the stories than on the objects, and one young couple bought a lamp simply because it reminded them of their grandparents' farmhouse. When I wrapped it for them, the man said, "Thanks for giving it a second life." That line stuck harder than the $20 bill. The sales weren't smooth. My first online orders through Etsy and eBay got returned because I misjudged shipping times. A clock face cracked in transit, and I refunded money I couldn't afford to lose. But with each failure, I built systems double-boxing faster responses, labeling every screw and washer during disassembly, so I didn't waste hours guessing where they fit later. My fear of being called a fraud softened into determination to outwork the skepticism. By early March, I'd sold enough small items that I dared a larger batch. A pair of lamps, a clock, and a brass serving tray went up online with crisp photos shot on my second-hand phone under a lamp I'd rebuilt just for lighting. When the last piece sold, I totaled the profit and saw the number glowing back at me, 847, exactly the amount I'd had when I left Pine Hollow. I wrote the word reset in my notebook in letters so thick the pen tore the paper. A few days later, Amos called me into the storage room. He held a stack of purchase invoices and tapped one page with a knuckle. Came across this while sorting, he said. The entry listed a household lot bought in October 2012. Seller C. Hawthorne. Among the items, walnut clock initials, V+E. My throat closed. Cassandra hadn't just cleared my room for an office, she had sold the clock my parents carved their promise into. It had been bought, resold, and discarded until it fell into my hands again. Anger surged, but underneath it something sharper settled. If Cassandra could throw away my past, I would make every piece she deemed worthless into proof of my future. From that night forward, I photographed every restoration before and after, logged the source, kept receipts and stories. Not just for buyers, but for myself. Revive Relics wasn't just a name forming in my head. It was a record, a shield, a way of turning what she sold off into something she couldn't erase. Still, the question clung like a burr if she'd been willing to sell the clock that carried my mother's initials. What else had vanished from that house, and what did she gain from stripping it away? The garage grew too small by late 2013. Orders trickled in faster than I could fill them, and after one night staring at the ceiling fan in my motel room, I signed a lease on a tiny studio above Sal's Deli. The air smelled of bread at dawn and frying onions at night, but the rent was cheaper than the motel, and the space had a balcony where I could strip paint without choking on fumes. I still worked out of the garage during the day, but my evenings belonged to planning. Revive Relics became official with paperwork I filed at the county office, though it felt strange to see my name printed under the line that said owner. I poured my energy into branding. If every restored item came with a recorded history, then no one could dismiss it as junk polished up by a novice. At the Willow Creek Small Business Center, Quinn Delgado, a mentor with a sharp suit and sharper eye, looked over my early catalog and said, "Provenance is everything. Make the story part of the sale." Her advice gave me a spine. I began typing detailed histories for each piece, attaching photos of the repair process and including a certificate signed with the new name, Revive Relics. In 2014, I scraped together enough courage and debt to borrow $50,000 from the local bank. The money turned into a 1,000-square-foot storefront downtown. The day the sign went up, letters black against cream, Revive Relics glowing in the window, I felt as if I had finally stepped out of the shadows of Pine Hollow. Friends from the Brew Haven and Amos himself showed up with coffee and sandwiches. For an afternoon, it felt like I was part of a family stitched together by work rather than blood. But the whispering started soon after. A customer at the counter one afternoon murmured to her friend, "He's just making money off old family stuff." Another returned a lamp, muttering that she'd heard I stole my mother's heirlooms to sell. The words cut sharper than I wanted to admit. That night at the flea market, I overheard a stranger tell someone Cassandra said he cleaned out the family house, sold everything to fund this place. I knew then the rumors had a mouthpiece. I threw myself into work, hiring my first employee, Juniper Lee, a 22-year-old with quick hands for wood grain and a fire in her voice when she said she was tired of being overlooked. We worked side by side until dawn more than once, sanding and staining pieces that needed to ship out by morning. But even as our skills grew, the shadow of Pine Hollow lingered. By 2015, I had begun driving to Colorado Springs and Denver to court larger clients. At a Denver trade fair, an older dealer cornered me, sneering that YouTube carpenters don't last long. He spread the word that my brand was built on stolen memories, not craft. Orders dipped. For weeks I lay awake wondering if Cassandra had already won by poisoning the well I was just beginning to drink from. One night back at the studio, I opened my email to find a message with no sender name. Subject line, "Watch out for the one who stole your mother's journal." My hands went cold. The only people who knew about the missing page in that journal were under the roof of Pine Hollow. Someone was reminding me or warning me that the secrets weren't buried. I sat at my workbench staring at the clock marked V+E. Its pendulum ticked softly steady despite the storms outside. I had built a storefront, hired help, and carved a name into the business registry. Yet the cracks in the past bled through the surface. Cassandra wasn't content with banishing me 12 years ago. She was reaching through rumor, trying to reduce me back to nothing. The emails, the gossip, The faint smell of her perfume that I swore drifted through a customer's coat one morning. They told me the same thing. I was still fighting for a voice against the woman who had tried to silence me since the beginning. And somewhere someone else knew the missing truth from my mother's journal. The only question was whether they meant to harm me with it or to finally set me free. By 2016, Revive Relics had grown into something far larger than the garage and the studio apartment above Sal's Deli. I signed a lease on a 6,000 square foot warehouse at the edge of town, a place that smelled of sawdust and machine oil with high windows that poured light over rows of workbenches. The scale of it thrilled and terrified me. Orders had tripled after a feature in a Denver lifestyle magazine, and suddenly I wasn't the man sanding clocks alone past midnight, but the one managing shipments, invoices, and a team of young workers looking to me for direction. Theo Vance joined us that spring, a 19-year-old who could coax life back into the smallest wristwatches. His curiosity made him reckless at times, but it also meant he spotted details I missed. One evening while filing invoices, he pointed out that a stack of older documents had initials scrawled in a handwriting I recognized too well. C.H. Cassandra's hand looping and practiced. The invoices were dated 2012 and 2013, the same years my life had collapsed into motel rooms and borrowed tools. The discovery gnawed at me. Around the same time, Quinn Delgado pulled me aside after a meeting with Vintage Vogue, a high-end interior chain we were courting. She warned me that success paints a target, that there would be people eager to drag me down. Her words hit harder when Juniper told me a customer demanded a refund, claiming she'd heard our business was built on stolen family heirlooms. The rumor I thought had burned out was still alive, flaring whenever Cassandra chose to fan it. The Vintage Vogue contract nearly broke me. They wanted 36 restored pieces for their Denver showrooms, all delivered within 6 weeks. A single delay could trigger penalties that would sink us. My team was green, mistakes piled up, and I worked myself to exhaustion to keep deadlines from slipping. I barely slept, lived on diner coffee, and heard Cassandra's voice in my head whenever I faltered. Yet we delivered. I walked through the showroom in Denver that fall, watching designers admire our work under gleaming lights, and for a moment I felt I had climbed free of her reach. Then came the spring of 2017. The Willow Creek Book Fair invited me to speak about starting a business from discarded things. I stood behind a podium in the community hall telling an audience about motel rooms and flea markets, about the value hidden in broken objects. Applause rose, polite and steady. But afterward, as the crowd thinned, a stranger pressed a sealed envelope into my hand and vanished before I could ask a single question. Inside was a torn scrap of paper, yellowed with age. The handwriting froze me, my mother's. The fragment read, "My final decision is that Orion will inherit," and then the words ended in a brutal tear. My chest tightened. I pulled out the journal I always carried, the one with the ragged gap in its middle, and fitted the scrap against the torn edge. It aligned perfectly, fibers marrying like a wound closing. My mother had written me into her will, into her legacy, and someone had ripped it away. I sat in the warehouse office that night, staring at the scrap under the lamplight, Theo tinkering quietly with a watch in the next room. All the success around me, the workers, the contracts, the warehouse stacked with furniture reborn, suddenly felt like scaffolding built over quicksand. My mother had left me something. Cassandra had stolen it. Victor had let her. And now pieces of that truth were dripping back into my hands, delivered by someone unseen. The mended journal lay heavy in my lap. No matter how high I built, the past was waiting to be reckoned with. And if my mother had trusted me with her final decision, I had to find out what Cassandra and Victor had done with it during those 12 missing years. By 2019, Revive Relics was thriving in 15 states, and I had moved into Silverstone Estate, a mansion perched high on Eagle's Crest with marble halls and a balcony that overlooked the modest rooftops of Pine Hollow. From my study window, I could see the neighborhood where I had once been thrown out with 2 suitcases. The irony wasn't lost on me. Yet power never comes without resistance. In January of 2020, the Willow Creek Chronicle ran a front-page article accusing me of profiting off stolen inheritance. The piece was anonymous but detailed, quoting family sources who claimed I had twisted my mother's journal into marketing fodder. I knew immediately whose hand was behind it. Cassandra had found a bigger stage. The fallout was swift. Vintage Vogue called nervous about the association. Clients asked pointed questions. Worse, my half-siblings Sage and River teenagers now posted on social media that they didn't know what to believe. "We just want the truth," Sage wrote under a filtered photo of Pine Hollow. Their doubts stung more than the article. I decided silence would be surrender. I released a statement showing the restored scrap of my mother's journal, proof that a page had been torn out, proof that something had been hidden. I didn't reveal the words, not yet, but I wanted the world to see that gaps existed, that my story wasn't fabricated. That week, a young journalist, Ellie Moore, reached out. We met in a quiet booth at a downtown diner, and she slid a photograph across the table. It was a bank record from 2012 showing a withdrawal of $50,000 from the E. Blaze Memorial Trust. The signature was Victor's. I stared at the numbers until they blurred. That money had been meant for me. It was the exact sum Cassandra had spent to buy and flip the household lot that contained the V+E clock. My inheritance had been siphoned to fuel their scheme. The ground tilted beneath me. I thought of Sage and River growing up on lies told their brother abandoned them, while the truth was that their mother and my father had gutted what was mine. Weeks later, Juniper called me to the office. Sage and River had found old tax records in a box in Pine Hollow, including forms signed by Cassandra under her married name, C. Hawthorne, tied to the same transactions. For the first time, they questioned her openly. I knew then the cracks inside Pine Hollow were spreading. Late one night, as I sat alone in Silverstone Estate, my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Victor. His voice was slurred, thick with drink. "Son, I can't hold this secret much longer," he muttered before the line cut off. I played it 3 times, the sound of his guilt heavy as lead. Silverstone's balcony looked down over the street, where I had once been pushed into the snow. The reversal of vantage was complete, but victory felt hollow. Cassandra was escalating, Victor was unraveling, and Sage and River were caught between 2 versions of truth. The evidence was mounting: the invoices, the scrap of my mother's words, the bank withdrawal, the tax forms, Victor's drunken confession. The fire Cassandra had set years ago was still burning, and it had reached the point where silence would turn me to ash along with her lies. I stood at the window, city lights flickering below, and asked myself the only question that mattered: was I ready to expose everything, even if it shattered what was left of my family, in order to finally claim the justice my mother had intended for me? On the morning after the Chronicle announced my purchase of Silverstone Estate, the gates at the foot of the driveway rattled with the sound of my past. Victor, Cassandra, Sage, and River stood there like ghosts, summoned by the ink on that article. Their coats were worn, their faces pinched as if they had rehearsed hardship, and for a moment the boy in me wanted to shut the gates and let the snow fall between us. Instead, I buzzed them through. The marble foyer echoed under their shoes. Cassandra's eyes darted from the chandelier to the paintings to the view through the tall windows, and her mouth curved into a smile that pretended gratitude, but carried expectation. "We're a family," she said, as if the words themselves erased 12 years. "You can't leave us in the cold." I led them past the fireplace, past the library shelves lined with books I had chosen for myself, until we reached the great room that overlooked Pine Hollow. I wanted them to see it, to stand in a place that embodied everything they said I would never be. Cassandra took the center of the room as if it were hers, speaking of second chances and obligations, of blood ties that trumped betrayal. I answered with my story. The motel room with the buzzing heater, the flea market tables where I prayed someone would buy a lamp, the nights bent over clocks and broken furniture until my hands shook. No one asked if I was alive, I told them. Not once. "You let me freeze while you filled my room with file cabinets." My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The walls carried it. I brought out the clock carved with V+E, placed it on the polished table between us. Sage's gaze locked on the initials, River's brow furrowed. Then I showed them the journal fragment, the jagged edge aligned with the missing page. For the first time I saw doubt bloom in their eyes, a fracture in the story they had been fed. Cassandra's voice sharpened. "That's nothing but old wood and scraps. You're twisting relics into revenge." I reached into my folder and slid out a printed scan. Victor's handwriting uneven, confessing what I had known all along, that he had been forced by Cassandra to turn me out. I read the closing line aloud. "Don't tell Cassandra. She'll leave me." Silence filled the room until even the ticking of the old clock seemed deafening. Sage's jaw tightened. "I saw the bank statement, Mom," she said. River nodded, adding quietly, "Your name was on it." They turned toward Cassandra, their faces raw with betrayal. I looked at Victor, who stood shrinking beside the window, his hands twisted together. "How long will you let her speak for you?" I asked. His silence was heavier than any denial. It was judgment passed on himself. The power had shifted. The room that once represented exile now became the stage where the exiled reclaimed his place. Yet even as the truth edged closer, I felt the weight of what came next. Victor's silence was an open wound, and Sage and River hovered at the edge of breaking free. The only question left was whether my father would find his voice before Cassandra dragged them down with her. By evening, the estate glowed with amber light from the sinking sun, the hills below cast in shadow. I gathered them on the balcony. Pine Hollow spread out beneath us like a reminder carved into the land. The air was crisp, the silence heavy. It was time. I opened my mother's journal and read the words aloud. "My final decision is that Orion will inherit and continue what I began." My voice shook, not with doubt, but with the weight of years carried to this moment. Cassandra lunged forward, her voice rising like glass breaking. "That's worthless. A scrap of paper doesn't make you worthy of anything. You're cruel, Orion. You've forgotten what family means." Before I could answer, Victor spoke. His voice was rough, trembling. "No, it's true." He looked at Sage and River, tears streaking his face. "I took the money. I let her persuade me. I betrayed my son. And I betrayed your mother's memory." His shoulders collapsed as though the words had been chains he finally dropped. Sage's eyes brimmed. River stepped quietly to my side, his silence speaking louder than Cassandra's fury. I reached for their hands. "I will always welcome you here," I told them. "But justice isn't letting back the ones who destroyed it." Cassandra's mask cracked. She screamed that I was heartless, then turned on her heel and stormed from the balcony. Victor followed, smaller than I had ever seen him, a man walking behind his own shadow. From the driveway came the sound of a car door shutting, and when I glanced down, I saw Ellie Moore waiting by the gate with a notebook in hand. Sage and River exchanged a look, then nodded. They would tell her everything. The truth that had been strangled for 12 years would finally breathe in public. We stayed on the balcony as the sky deepened to gold, the three of us wrapped in a silence that was no longer heavy but healing. I poured coffee into porcelain cups, set the old photographs of my mother on the table, and watched Sage and River study the face they had been taught to forget. The sun dipped lower, painting the estate in warm firelight. I exhaled and let the words rise. I belong here. For the first time, I believed it. The past was closed behind us, not erased, but transformed. Cassandra's power ended where the truth began. Sage and River were no longer bound to her stories, and I, once cast into the snow with nothing but a box and a broken heart, now stood in a place of my own making. In the days that followed, I planned a new gathering at the Willow Creek Business Club, not for investors or partners, but for the young ones who thought they were too broken to start. I would tell them about motel rooms and neon lights, about clocks that refused to tick until someone cared enough to wind them again. As the sun vanished that night, I felt the question stretch ahead of me, not as a burden, but as a promise with the past settled. How far could revived relics go, and what new story would I carve from the flame that refused to die?